Hello all, welcome to the second tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a database, add two tables to this database, and also create a relationship between these two tables. Okay. So if you haven't already done that, please open Microsoft Access. I have Access 2013. Depending on the version that you have, you may see a slightly different interface. Okay. What you want to do here is to basically create a blank desktop database or a blank database. Okay, so look for that option. You're creating a new database. I just clicked on it. It tells me, do you want to name it something? I'm going to say sure, DB Bank Sample. You can call it whatever you want. Just make a note of where the database is being stored. It could be under My Documents, it could be under desktop, wherever it's convenient to you. Just know where it is so that you can retrieve it at a later time to review the material we went over. Okay, I'm going to click on create right here, and bingo, I have a blank database. Access by default gives you creates this new table called table 1. We don't need it. If you don't have it, that's great, don't do anything, just wait for my instructions. But if you do see this, you can either right click here and delete it, or simply close the table and it goes away. Okay, now I'm going to go back to tables. You'll see that the table 1 has disappeared because I told Access I don't need it. I'm going to start from scratch, and you would need to find right here on the top a menu for creating new databases, creating a new table. Okay, so look for this option somewhere that says create table, and you would also see multiple options for creating tables. We are going to start our creation with the table design option. Okay, so click on table design. So we are creating a new table and viewing this table in the table design view. Okay, this is what you see. So we are creating this new table. Right now it's tentatively called table 1. We'll rename it shortly. Let's say that we want to create a table for customer table. Okay, if you want pause the video and think about what kind of information you would need for a customer table. Okay, if you want to store customer information, obviously you would need customer name, you would need customer address, you would need customer contact information, let's say a telephone number. Okay, and you would also need a unique identifier. We talked about this in class. It's called the primary key, something to uniquely describe a particular record, particular piece of information about the customer. Okay, so I'm going to call this customer ID, and I like to use, again, you can call it customer ID. I like to call it cust ID. Okay, and you see that on the right next to this, when I describe the label for it as customer ID, Access automatically assigns this as a short text. That's the data type. That means you can type in customer ID as A1, B2, C3, right? It includes both numbers and alphabets. Okay, for our purposes, let's assume that we are not going to be using alphabets. So let's make this a number. Okay, so it's a drop-down box. You just click here under data type, you pick number. So I'm defining customer ID as a number. And you would also note that towards the bottom of the screen right here, it gives you other options for each of these attributes. So for number, you see that the field size is a specific size called long integer. If you want to know what it is, you can do a search help on Access. Okay, but it just tells Access that the number can be so many digits long. Okay, you also have something called decimal places, auto. It also tells you that by default, Access will assign a value of 0. Okay, so if you don't understand what it is, you're going to see this pretty soon when we switch from the design view to the data view or data sheet view pretty soon. Okay, there are a bunch of other characteristics here. We'll ignore it for the time being. We'll talk about some of these characteristics as they become more relevant. Okay, so that's customer ID. That's a unique attribute to denote each record. Okay, you need, and after customer ID, you also need customer name. So I'm going to call it customer names, CUST name. And again, in a real database, you might have two different field attributes for this. You could have a first name and a last name. We're going to keep it simple. We're just going to call it customer name and assume that we're going to write the entire name here. Okay, and you'd notice that Access automatically assigned this short text, and you also see that the characteristics for this attribute changes as the data type changes. Okay, so next, again, instead of the address, you could have street name, street number, street name, right, apartment number, city name, and so on. I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm going to say customer city. That's it. Okay, for our purposes, let's just assume that we only want to track the city information. Okay, so that also happens to be a short text, 255 size. And then let's say lastly, we also want the telephone number. So I'm going to call it customer telephone, TEL. Okay, take a guess. What data type do you think telephone should be? Okay, think about it. If you thought number, yeah, you're probably right. But for databases, it makes sense. You're going to see this when I move here. It automatically picks short text. We're going to see why text might make more sense than number very shortly. Okay, so for the time being, for telephone number, instead of number, make sure that you have short text. Okay, and we'll see why this makes sense in a couple of minutes. Okay, so this table I'm going to call this soon as a table customer, has 4 attributes: customer ID, customer name, customer city, and customer telephone number. And this obviously is a primary key because it uniquely identifies each record. Okay, so all I need to do is assign this a value of primary key. Okay, so let me right click and basically choose primary key here. So you need to basically go to this corner here, to this particular select this record, right, and then right click and choose primary key. Okay, so now if you did that right, you'd see a key sign that shows that this is indeed the primary key. Okay, so we have 4 attributes. Customer ID is a primary key, and we want this to be called table customer. Access, when I try to close this, it's going to ask you, do I want to save this table? So I'm going to say, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to say yes, I want to save changes to the design of table called table 1. Right now it's called table 1. And please, when Access is giving you some messages, make sure you read it before you click on yes or no. Okay, especially important for Access. So it's asking me what should be this table name, and I'm going to call it TBL. I like to always designate tables as TBL and then some descriptive name for the table. I'm going to call it customer, or you could call it customer info. Okay, I'm going to call it table customer, TBL customer, and I'm going to say okay. So now, bingo, we have created our first table. Okay, let's just take a moment to go inside and take another look at this table. So go on the left hand side here and double click on this table customer. Okay, if you cannot see the table, make sure that you choose the right object, tables. You should be able to see it after you've saved it. I double clicked it. Now suddenly the table kind of looks different. If you notice, it's familiar to you because we just created these 4 attributes: customer ID, customer name, customer city, and customer telephone number. Also note that we could add additional attributes directly here, but I prefer to add it in the design view. Okay, so the view that you have right now is called data view or data sheet view. Okay, where you could actually enter data. We're not going to do that right now. We will do this in the next tutorial. But note something interesting here. You do see that the value here is 0 for customer ID. Do you remember why we see a 0 here? Let's check back. I'm going to go back to the left hand side here, where I have an option to switch the view from data sheet view to design view. Right now we are in the data sheet view, and when I switched it to the design view, I can actually see the original view we were working with. Okay, and you do see here under customer ID, right, that at the bottom of the characteristics here, the default value by default happened to be 0. So it basically tells access or this table that any new record, right? Even if you did not enter a value, put a 0 in there for customer ID, okay? And for the other field names, we don't have anything. If it makes sense for you, for whatever reason, let's say that you want to make the city New York because most of your customers are from New York, of course you can go down here and make the default value New York, right? And then let's try that. I'm going to type in New York, okay? And remember, this is a text field, so I am okay typing in text information. So for customer city, I just changed the default value to New York, okay? And for fun's sake, let's even say, okay, I want this to be 000. Let's see what happens, okay? This is for customer ID. So I'm going to close this. It's asking me to save the changes, right? So the same thing happened as before. I go back to the table customer here and note, when I typed in 000, because it's a number, it assumes 000 is a 0, and it shows you 0. And you also see that customer city is New York, okay? So by default, even though we haven't entered any information, Access can start saving you some time by assigning default values that you created when you were designing the table, okay? I hope that's clear. So let's close this table. We thankfully have our first table done. It's as easy as that, okay? Now remember, we need two tables for this very basic database called database bank sample, right here, the name that I assigned to it. So I want to create another table, so I would look for this create new table option, and as I mentioned, I'd like to work with table design for this particular object table, okay? So let's choose this, and again you see very similar interface. Now it should be very familiar to you. If you actually are feeling adventurous, pause the video at this point, think about account information, right? And see if you can create at least two field names on your own. Think about what we think one needs for this account. So pause the video and try to type in a field name and the appropriate data type for it, okay? If you are still guessing, I can actually give you, of course, the two field names or two or three field names. Obviously, you would need an account ID, right? You would definitely need an account balance. So think about it. So just try to create account ID and account balance, and also assign appropriate data types to them, okay? So if you finish doing that, let's continue this here. So I'm going to start with account ID. You can of course type in full account ID. I'm going to stop with ACC ID, but it's just a label, so it doesn't matter if you typed in account ID, okay? The more descriptive you are, the better it is. I typed in account ID and I actually see the data type to be short text. Let's keep it short text for this particular purpose. If you chose numbers, you're probably okay with it, but for our tutorial, let's change it back to short text, because when I enter data, I would like to enter, for example, for checking account, I'd like to enter C1. For savings account, I'd like to enter S1. For investment account, I'd like to enter I1, okay? So let's do it as a short text. And the second field, I'm going to call it, I just gave you a hint, account type. And that would also be short text, where I'm basically going to designate what type of account it is, okay? It could be a checking account, investment account, savings account, multiple types of accounts, okay? The third value I'm going to enter is account balance. So what do you think this data type should be? Account balance typically has to be, in US dollars or some other currency, some form of currency. So let's see if Access has something suitable for us, and bingo, you do have currency. So I'm going to pick currency. It's useful to have this here because it helps you with calculations later, okay? I'm also going to have the date the account was opened the first time, meaning the history of the account. When did the customer actually open this account? 10 years ago, yesterday, okay? So account open date. And what do you think the data type should be? It should be, let's see what Access has here. They do have a date and time. So I'm going to pick date and time. Okay, and I'm actually going to, because it's date and time, I'm going to come down here to the format, see if I have options. So it actually gives me multiple options in terms of what format, including a timestamp. So if you want to leave it as a general date, it's probably okay. But again, for our purposes, I'm going to choose medium date. Okay. Again, remember, it's a prerogative of the designer. There are reasons why we may pick a specific format. Okay. And also think about default value. Do you think it makes sense to have a default value of 0 here or $100? Again, I'll let you think about it. It really depends on the business situation at hand for that particular bank. Okay, but I'm going to leave it blank at the moment. Oh, sorry, I'm talking about account open date, so it's not really the currency. For currency, you may want to have 100. By default, it's assigned to you as 0. Okay, sorry if I went too fast here. For default value for account balance, right now we have 0. Access did it, I didn't do it. If you don't like 0, you can erase it and leave it empty, or you can give it as $100. For example, let's say that the minimum balance you need to have for all of these accounts is 100 for your bank. Then it makes sense to have the value as 100 in this case. Okay, but I'm going to leave it as it is. And for account open date, I want you to think about, does it make sense to have a default value here? Okay, I'll come back to this shortly, but think about, do we need to have a default value for this particular field? Okay, we'll come back to that. So now take a look at this. We have 4 attributes, 4 field names here. Is there anything missing? Think about it. Okay, any field names missing? I would say yes, there is one important field name missing, because if you do want to create a relationship between these two tables, the customer table and account table, right? Think about it conceptually. Customer table has customer information. This table has account information. Great. But do I know for any of these accounts here, to whom does this account belong to, right? Right now, we don't. So we need something to identify customers. And yes, we do have a suitable and appropriate field name that we already created, the unique value, the primary key for the other table, customer ID. That would be the best option for this. Okay, so I'm going to call it cust ID. If you actually, again, if you remember, we call this label cust ID, right, for the other table. Here, you can actually call it customer ID. It does not matter. Or you could call it something else, right? It should not matter. Customer number, it should not matter, because it's only a label. But however, I want to emphasize this, very important. Think about the data type. It's got to match the data type that you have in the other table. Okay, because if it doesn't, then you'll have a problem with the next step when you create a relationship between these 2 tables. You cannot do it. Okay, so the only important thing here that you need to remember is that the data type for this linking field should match. Okay, and if you remember, we had chosen number for customer ID. We actually called it cust ID in other table, but we chose number. So the label doesn't matter as much, but this matters a lot. Make sure that they match. Okay, so we have now 5 field names, and we just created, or we are close to creating, the second table. Okay, so of course I want to save this work right now, so I'm going to do that by closing the table, letting access ask me, do I want to save the changes? Yes, I do. So again, I'm going to call it TBL account. Okay, bingo. Okay, we did forget something. Can you see what it is? It says there is no primary key defined. Okay, and it says although primary key isn't required, it's highly recommended. So do I want to create a primary key now? Yes, but I don't want access to do it. So let me just say no, and I'm going to reopen it in design view and create it again. Okay, so let's just say no for the time being. So we see on the left hand side 2 different tables. Let me reopen table customer. You see this again, the design view, you do have the primary key, and if you notice, customer ID is a number, right, and the data type has to match. The labels don't have to. Okay, so I'm going to close the customer table. I'm going to open the account table by double clicking it. Okay, and again notice default value was 0, right, in the design view, and because it's a currency, by default you have $0.00. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the design view, right, and as I mentioned, I forgot to create the primary key, so I'm going to select, oh, of course, hopefully you know this already. What should be the primary key? Of course, account ID for this table, because for account table, account ID would presumably uniquely identify each record. Okay, so I'm going to choose this record, this row, and make it as a primary key. Of course, you can also right click and assign a primary key, or you can move around, find the key here and click on it. Okay, and again you notice that there are multiple ways of doing things on Access, so I'll try to show you multiple ways whenever it makes sense. Okay, so now we actually have 2 tables in our database. Okay, so this is really, I mean, again, I want us to step back and think about it. Okay, we created a database called, so okay, it's asking me save changes. I'm going to say yes. We created a database called database sample with 2 tables. Okay, so again, if you remember right now, the database, I'm going to open customer, I'm going to close it, I'm going to open account, I'm going to close it. If you notice, there is no data in these tables. So what we've done so far is basically create the tables. We basically specified what attributes this table should have, what characteristics, right, should these attributes have, and we try to specify some default values, right. We are going to do a few more things called input mask and a few other things. Okay, but we are basically setting up the tables now, right, setting up the structure of the table now for entering data later. Okay, this is the very first step. Okay, let me again take that back. This is not really the first step. The first step really is designing the table, right? We skipped that part because offline presumably we could use entity relationship diagrams or some such modeling techniques to design how a database should look like. How many tables should it have? What kind of attributes should these tables have? How should these tables be linked? All these decisions we are assuming that it's been made for us. So I'm basically giving you the design. I told you that we have 2 tables, and I'm also telling you right now, pretty soon I will be telling you that these 2 tables should be linked together, right? So that means that I'm giving you the design, I'm making things easy for you. But design is very important. That's the first step. So once I have the design, now I create the structure of the database. So I created a database, created 2 tables, and now I'm going to link them together, define a relationship. Okay, and once we do that, the second step is complete, right? The structure is there, and then we can start entering data. Okay, so let's now do the last step here. I kept saying defining a relationship, creating a relationship. What do I mean by this? Okay, so now what you need to do is, depending on the version you have, look for an option called database tools. Okay, and somewhere there you would see something called relationships, and this is where you would basically see how the tables are related. Okay, and you can specify this upfront, and again I'd advise you to do this before you enter any data. Okay, so let's pick relationships, and it's actually giving you multiple choices, and because we have 2 tables, you see both of them, right? So I'm going to add table account, and I'm going to add table customer. I'm going to close this, right? And I can move this around whichever way I want, make it look nice, right? I can even shorten this, lengthen this. Okay, and you do see that this kind of gives you a bird's eye view of all the tables you have in your database, assuming you added the tables. Okay, and you do see that we have 2 tables, table customer with customer ID as a primary key. You have table account with account ID as a primary key. And you also note that in the table account you have customer ID, right, that presumably links back to the table customer, providing the link Therefore, you would know whenever you have some information for these accounts, to which customer does this account belong to. Okay, think about it logically. This is going to be important in the next step when we actually enter data. Okay, in the next tutorial rather. So what we need to do right now is to create a link. So what I want to do is first go to this original table customer, take the primary key of that customer ID, customer table, customer ID, drag and drop it to customer ID. Okay, so again, if you did that right, you would see this option here that says edit relationships. Make sure that you have the right table, the right field names here, table account and customer ID, because we changed the label here, but both of them have the same underlying data type, which is a number. Okay, it's actually very easy, but there's one thing you have to remember to do, very, very important. You have to enforce referential integrity. Okay, this goes back to some of the concepts we discussed in class about databases, where we talked about how databases can by default make it easier to maintain integrity. Okay, so I'll try to by enforcing this in here, you'll see how you can minimize data entry errors or some logical errors. Okay, so I'm going to show you examples of this later when we enter the data, but right now what you need to remember is make sure that you check mark enforce referential integrity, and then you create the relationship. And if you did that right, you would actually see that Access created a one-to-many relationship. Okay, and if you want to edit it for whatever reason later, let's say that you forgot to check referential integrity and you don't see this 1 to infinity but just a line, then you may want to just move your mouse over here, choose it, and then right click, and then you can edit it again. Okay, and then uncheck it. Okay, so there are ways to edit it in case you forgot to do something here or you did something incorrectly. You can either delete it or edit the relationship and change it. Okay, so you see that customer ID is linked to the customer ID. So this is what we meant when we said databases are a way to keep track of information by using a logical structure. In this case, the logical structure is a table with logical links, okay, between these tables, and they, by this design, help you enforce certain integrity constraints. Okay, and we'll talk more about this in the next tutorial. So for the time being, what we've done is basically lay the groundwork for entering the data later by creating the structure of the tables and defining the relationship between these tables. Okay, so if you've done that, you can close the relationship. Okay, and in the next tutorial we will talk about how to enter data and also do some additional tweaks to the design element. Okay, so see you in the next tutorial. Bye.